it's time for some weekend picks. We got a couple of fights this weekend, got 2 cards, one on Friday and one on Saturday. So we will start with the Katie Taylor versus Rose Volante unification fight in the lightweight division. This is a fight that I have talked about many times in passing. How this fight will be more semblant of
the McCaskill fight,
the Jessica McCaskill fight, as opposed to some other of Katie Taylor's recent performances. Performances where she really got to have her way with her opponents. I don't believe that the aesthetic of this fight is going to be like the aesthetic of those fights. Understand that Rose Volante will be the biggest puncher that Katie Taylor has faced in recent memory, and she could arguably be the biggest puncher that she's faced so far in the entirety of her career. It's for that reason that I feel that Katie Taylor's going to have to work around this power. Try not to engage Rose Volante in any exchanges, because that's what Rose wants. That's what she's looking to do. That's where she can use her power, in the pocket while both fighters are trading. It behooves Katie Taylor to not engage her in such a fashion that will leave her subject to Rose Volante's power, particular to Rose, her right hand, her straight right hand, which is fast becoming a money punch, her money punch. This is the kind of right hand that could score a flash knockdown quite easily if the opponent isn't careful. Now, I do think that Katie Taylor's got everything she needs to work around Rose's power, and let's talk about that. You know, a lot of times when people bring up Katie Taylor, they like to talk about her hand speed, they like to talk about her combinations. Essentially, what they like to talk about is her offense. But I think what's going to really make the biggest difference in this fight isn't offense, it's defense. It's going to come down to footwork. It's going to come down to movement and angles, to land pot shots, judicious pot shots on Rose, who's likely to be the aggressor coming forward in this fight. What I think the aesthetic of the fight is going to look like is you're going to see a Rose Volante who's doing all she can to keep up with a moving target that's peppering her with shots as she goes. And you'll want to make a note of this, that because Katie Taylor may end up fighting on the fly in this fight, the punches that she does land may not have much mustard on them because she's fighting on the go. She's not sitting on those punches. I don't think we're going to see a Katie Taylor in this fight that we saw in the last fight. A Katie Taylor that was coming forward and sitting on those punches, throwing with bad intentions. That's not what I think we're going to see tomorrow night. What I think we're going to see is a more mobile, more careful and cautious Katie Taylor using angles to evade and counter. Evade and counter whilst simultaneously staying a moving target. Staying a moving target as to control the distance at which the fight is being fought and when and where in the ring the action actually happens. That's really what determines the ring general. Who's fighting their fight and who is making the other fighter acquiesce to their fight. Because Rose Volante is not showing up tomorrow night looking for a boxing match. Rose Volante is not looking for a finesse fight. Rose Volante very much intends tomorrow night to show up looking for a knockout. And that's going to be evident in how she chooses to fight this fight. And it's going to be up to Katie to control that, to control Rose Volante's aggression and keep a lid on it, bottle it, disarm her power, and don't give her the chance to use it, while at the same time showing the cleaner, clearer work in front of the eyes of the judges. Now, the perils associated with the Rose Volante fight is that much like Jessica McCaskill, she is a very aggressive fighter that really believes in her power. But unlike Jessica, she is a little bit more put together. Her movements are a little bit more compact, as are her punches. She's not just throwing bolo punches out there. She's not just swinging for the fences, throwing haymakers. This is a fighter that more or less has some technique of her own whilst implementing her aggression. So it could be a tough night for Katie. And I'll tell you, might sound a little crazy, but I wouldn't be surprised if Rose manages to score a knockdown or catch Katie off balance and causes her to slip at least once in this fight, because aggressive opponents that constantly come forward throwing punches can warrant such a thing to happen. You know, Katie Taylor's going to be on the move. That's what I predict. I'd be very much surprised if Katie Taylor actually decided to stand there and trade with this kind of a puncher. But my official prediction is Katie Taylor wins a hard-fought fight on points and unifies that WBO title with her WBA and IBF titles, bringing her that much closer to becoming the undisputed champion of the lightweight division. I think that there are going to be some difficulties in spots. You may see a Katie Taylor that's a bit more uncomfortable than what you're accustomed to, but I do think you're going to see Katie Taylor tomorrow night with her hand raised. And next up is the IBF Super Featherweight title fight between IBF champion Tevin Farmer and young undefeated contender John O'Carroll. Let's talk about this fight. Funny thing about this fight is that it promises a lot of action. It does promise a lot of action because John O'Carroll is a very aggressive combination puncher. This is a guy that's persistent when he's stringing shots together. And Tevin Farmer just so happens to be a very educated slickster, a guy who knows how to fight in the pocket, taking minimal punishment while working off the counter. You put those two styles together in a ring, and what you end up is with an action fight. And I think in the case of Tevin Farmer and John O'Carroll, there's going to be a lot of action for more reasons than one. You see, one thing that these guys got in common, in spite of the differences in their stylistic implementation, one thing that they both have in common is that neither of the two is a concussive puncher. Neither of the two is a knockout artist. You'll notice that John O'Carroll, the young up-and-coming southpaw, guy's only 26 years old. He's got a professional record of 16-0, but in those 16 victories, he's only actually knocked out 3 of his opponents. He is not a concussive puncher. And as we all know, Tevin Farmer, for all his skill and all his nuances, the one thing that he lacks is also punching power. That creates a situation to where you look at these two guys' styles, you see that John O'Carroll likes to throw a lot of punches, and you see that Tevin Farmer knows how to evade a lot of punches, and what you're going to end up with is an action fight, because neither of these two guys have that one-hitter-quitter kind of power to end the fight early. And John O'Carroll, being as aggressive as he is and his affinity for stringing punches together, it's conceivable that a lot of punches are going to get thrown in this fight, though there's no telling how many of them are actually going to land. John O'Carroll, for all his virtues, he's really not a sharpshooter. He's more of a machine gun guy. He gives you the impression that he's trying to outwork a guy, punch a guy. You know, he's trying to make an impression. He's trying to make a dent. But I do feel that Tevin Farmer is adept to the task because of his defensive prowess, his upper body movement, and his counter-punching. That Tevin Farmer knows how to handle himself against this kind of an opponent in the pocket, because that's where he just so happens to excel. Now, I think that Tevin Farmer is going to show his shit in the pocket, but there are going to be moments when he's got to step out and he's got to come up for air, because John O'Carroll's going to be trying to drown him. Understand what I mean when I say that John O'Carroll is a persistent puncher, that when this guy's stringing shots together, he's going to keep trying even if he's not hitting anything. Now, what I like about Tevin Farmer, particularly for this fight, is there's not a huge disparity in the stature of both fighters. That Tevin Farmer has equal access upstairs and downstairs, and that affords him the opportunity to mix up those punches. He might mix in some body shots, he might mix in some shots upstairs. The combinations can vary, since Tevin Farmer doesn't have to overextend himself to hit this guy in the face or hit this guy in the midsection. I'll tell you what I think. I think that John O'Carroll does bring enough to the table that he can maybe make things difficult for Tevin in spots. But ultimately, I think that Tevin is going to show the cleaner, clearer work. But I do see this fight going to the cards. I do see Tevin Farmer winning this thing on points. I think tomorrow night, he is going to go home with his belt and take John O'Carroll's O with him. And when it comes to John, the fact that he's a young, undefeated guy, he's only 26 years old, he looks like a durable kid. And because he looks like a durable kid, I think he's going to take the counter punch as well. Overall, there are two things I'm noticing. That one, Tevin's really not a big puncher. And two, this kid looks durable. So that lends credence to the notion that John's going to take those punches well, but ultimately, he may lose a decision. Because he's not a finesse fighter. You know, like I said, he's a machine gun guy. He's willing to throw a lot of shots even if they're not hitting anything, and that's that kind of aggression. That's what opens the door for Tevin Farmer's accurate counter-punching. So I've got Tevin Farmer defending and keeping his IBF title tomorrow night. And last, but certainly not least, the most talked about fight among all this weekend's fights that are going down. Talking about the Mikey Garcia versus Carroll Spence IBF welterweight title fight. So let's talk about this thing. You know, I'm not a miracle guy. I'm not a guy that banks on a long shot due to optimism. You know, I'm not naive here. This is boxing. It's a brutal sport. I look at the situation and I take it for what it is. I don't take it for what I want it to be or what I want to happen. I take it for what it is. And what is this? I'll tell you what this is. This is a fight between a guy whose last fight was at 135 pounds and his next fight is at 147 pounds. His fight's at 147 pounds and he's done absolutely nothing there. In spite of all his ring experience, his championship experience, none of that negates that at 147 pounds, Mikey Garcia ain't done shit. To top it all off, you're not going to 147 for just any old body. No champion of opportunity, not just some belt holder. You're going up there for what is arguably the most concussive puncher in the entire weight class. A guy who just so happens to be big for his division. And your hope is that you can outskill this guy to offset his size and his power. It's not something that can't be done. But in the case of Mikey Garcia, I'm not sure that he has the style to pull that kind of a miracle off. So I take it for what it is. I take this for what it was the same way I took Gennady Golovkin versus Kell Brook. That, look, you know, Brook, you might be big for 147, but you're not big enough for 160. And I take this for what it is the same way I took Canelo versus Khan for what it was. Khan, you're a really fast guy, but Canelo's only got to hit you once, and the fight's over. Okay? I took all of those fights for what they were because that's the logical way to do it. And when I look at this fight, I'm taking it for what it is. Maybe Mikey Garcia, in those early rounds when they're feeling each other out and getting a whiff of what the other guy's got, maybe in those early rounds, before both of these guys work up a sweat and get into a rhythm, maybe Mikey can have success in those early rounds with his timing, with his up jab, that could split Errol Spence's guard. Particular to Spence, he really doesn't have the best defense. His defense is a bit leaky. And maybe that's what Mikey Garcia was talking about when he says that he saw something. Maybe that's what he saw. That Errol Spence, you know, there's room to hit this guy with hard shots, to hit this guy with punches that penetrate his guard. But even if you can, there's a good chance he can withstand what you've got. So what happens when Errol Spence makes the decision that I've tasted Mikey Garcia's best? I've eaten his up jab and his uppercuts in his right hand, and none of this stuff is really fazing me. What happens after that? I'll tell you what happens after that. What happened to Kell Brook? This guy's not gonna sit here playing hit and not get hit with you. He knows he doesn't have to box you once he's tasted your best. At that point in the fight, he is going to make a decision to steamroll you, to walk through your punches. That he's gonna bring out the big guns to unload firepower, sheer firepower and size, the likes of which you've never had to deal with up until this point. Do realize this is not Sergey Lipinets, this is not Adrian Broner, and this is not Robert Easter. What was there to exploit in those fighters is not here in Errol Spence. For Mikey Garcia to land any of his punches, it's got to be in the pocket because of the difference in stature between the two fighters. Essentially, Mikey's so small, he's got no choice but to fight this fight in the pocket. And that's a dangerous place to be. That's the kill box if you're in there with Errol Spence, because that puts you in proximity of his body attack. He won't have to key his way in with that southpaw jab and try to track down a moving target, because it just so happens that you're so small, you'll already have to be there to land any kind of punches.
Of your own.
You can try to break his rhythm with that up jab, timing that up jab to stun him with a punch that maybe he doesn't see in that particular moment. But that's only going to get you by for so long. At some point, you're gonna have to be able to inflict damage to get some kind of respect against Errol Spence. Because if you don't, there's nothing stopping him from rolling right over you. And that's what I'm anticipating is going to happen. Maybe in those first two rounds, Mikey exceeds expectations. Maybe he looks like he belongs for a little while. But I'll say around 3 and 4, you know, Errol Spence is going to take this thing over. That's how I feel. And that's not, that's not meant to discredit Mikey Garcia. I've never denied Mikey Garcia his just due for what he's accomplished so far throughout 4 weight classes. Understand, Mikey Garcia graces the #2 spot on the Ring IQ pound for pound list based on merit alone. so I've never denied this kid his credit. But you'll excuse me and you'll forgive me if I'm not wide-eyed enough to think that there's going to be a miracle on Saturday night. That's not what I'm thinking. What I'm thinking is 5-6 rounds, Errol Spence gets Mikey out of there, or Robert Garcia sees the amount of punishment Mikey's taking and throws that towel. Lives to fight another day. It's his brother, for God's sake. You think he's gonna let him stand out there and get pummeled more than he needs to? If the fight looks like it's going south and Robert doesn't like it, he will throw the towel.
You know, the kind of talk I've been hearing leading up to this fight, it's all been very wide-eyed and very naive, and I'm just not gonna opt for that just because I'm in awe of one guy's ambitions. It's a shame that Mikey Garcia's got more cojones to hop in there with what is supposed to be PBC's boogeyman, but Keith Thurman, who's a more accomplished welterweight, even than Spence, and Sean Porter, they just couldn't find the time. Maybe that's why so many people are in awe of Mikey Garcia, taking on this fight when it's completely unnecessary, when it's an unnecessary risk that could have career-altering consequences. Maybe that's why some people feel wide-eyed about it. They see the confidence that Mikey Garcia exhibits, and that makes them believe. But I've seen this kind of confidence before. I mean, look at Guillermo Rigondeaux leading up to the Lomachenko fight. You know, it was all bells and whistles leading up to the fight. But I was of the opinion, no matter what he's saying ahead of the fight, reality is, you're older, you're smaller, he's in his prime, and he's got the same kind of background that you've got. So odds are he is going to overwhelm you. And that's what happened, in spite of those people who believed in Rigo, in spite of their best wishes and Rigo's. So I admire the confidence and the ambition of Mikey Garcia. And if he does pull off a miracle, believe me, he will get his just due. But I'm not banking on that miracle. I think Mikey's in over his head. I think he's made a mistake, and I think he's gonna pay for it on Saturday night. So my official prediction for the Mikey Garcia versus Errol Spence fight is I've got Spence by way of knockout or technical knockout in about 5 or 6 rounds. Feel free to disagree.